Hi everyone, and welcome to this video on Act 4 Scene 1 of Othello. This is the last video that we're going to use to look at this particular scene, so I hope you enjoy it and it's useful for you. In terms of where we're at in the play, Othello has been eavesdropping on Cassio speaking to Iago, and now Othello is even more convinced that he has definite proof that Desdemona is having an affair. And in today's scene, his verbal abuse of Desdemona turns into physical violence. So in terms of the big question we're going to be looking at today, it is, how is Act 4, Scene 1 a turning point in the play? Well, it's a movement from the private sphere to the public sphere, first of all. So although Othello has made accusations of Desdemona in private, although it's clear in the kind of world of their own marriage that the relationship isn't going well, in this particular scene that's made public. As well as that, we've got a movement from verbal attacks to physical violence as well. And we've also got a shift because Othello is called back from Cyprus, and that particular job of being governor of Cyprus is supposed to be given to Cassio. So there's a political shift in this scene as well. So let's have a look then at the language of the scene. Well, once Cassio leaves, and we talked about what Cassio said in the previous video, Othello comes out of hiding and he's absolutely incensed. He says, "Let her rot and perish and be damned tonight." Look at the violence and also the level of disgust in Othello's language there. The fact that he's alluding to hell and that he's using prose instead of blank verse. And this is one of the first occasions where he says, "She shall not live." So he's now determined that Desdemona is going to die. And Othello says, "My heart is turned to stone. I strike it and it hurts my hand." And for the Renaissance audience who would have been at least relatively familiar with biblical texts, the allusion to the Bible would have been quite clear here. In the Bible, there's various points at which different prophets and so on talk about how hearts are turned from stone to living flesh. Having a heart that's like stone means that you have no emotions, you have no compassion. And in the world of Christianity, that's not what you want. You want to have a compassionate, living, beating heart that feels for other people. And Othello does the reverse here. So this is a clear signal that he's becoming increasingly immoral as the play progresses. And he says, "I strike it and it hurts my hand." Now there's going to be a literal strike later on in the play as well. So it's interesting that that word is repeated here too. And then Othello and Iago start discussing various methods of murder that they might use to dispose of Desdemona. In the original source that Shakespeare got a lot of his ideas from in the play, Othello and Iago beat Desdemona to death together, and then they pull down the ceiling on top of her to conceal the body. Othello doesn't care in this version about concealing his crime. He doesn't seem to be particularly concerned about that. And the symbolism of beating Desdemona to death doesn't seem to quite fit with Shakespeare's plan. So initially Othello says, "I will chop her into messes." So he's imagining the dismemberment of her body. So this is an image of complete and utter violence, of uncontrolled attack on Desdemona. And then he says, "Well, get me some poison then." And that imagery of poison would fit in with the imagery and the motifs that we've seen throughout the play. The idea that Iago has poisoned Othello's mind would then be reflected in the use of poison. But instead of that, Iago says, "Strangle her in her bed, even the bed she hath contaminated." And this is the plan that they eventually choose. So there's a lot of symbolism going on here. Firstly, the strangling of Desdemona is a silencing of the woman in a patriarchal society. The main problem that Desdemona has posed to Iago is that she's too forthright, she's too determined, she is our captain's captain. And as a misogynist, Iago cannot cope with a strong woman. And so the method that he recommends would silence that determined, forthright, outspoken aspect of Desdemona's character. The idea of strangling her in the bed as well plays into Othello's sexual anxieties and the fact that he thinks that she's had an affair. And the bed that she's going to be strangled in is the wedding bed, so it should be a symbol of their marriage and of their love, but actually it turns into a symbol of destruction at the end of the play. So then Some of the other characters come on stage. Desdemona comes on stage, and Ludovico has arrived from Venice. Now, we might remember Ludovico from Act 1. He's one of the senators. He's a voice of order and authority in the play, and he has arrived on Cyprus, and he's bringing with him a letter that says that Cassio is going to become the governor of Cyprus and Othello is going to be called elsewhere. So Othello is a bit annoyed, obviously, about what it says in this particular letter. And Desdemona asks him about it, and Othello strikes her. And Ludovico responds, he says, "My lord, this would not be believed in Venice, though I should swear I saw it. 'Tis very much. Make her amends, she weeps." So Ludovico is brought on at this point because, well, I'll tell you a story. It's the story of the frog in the bucket of water. So when the frog goes into the bucket of water, if the water's boiling, the frog's going to jump straight out. If the frog goes into the bucket of water when it's cold and the water gradually heats up and then boils, the frog is going to die. This is an old, well-known story, in case you haven't heard it before. And the moral of the story is that if you go into a situation and you've got no experience of that situation, you're going to be very surprised and you're going to jump straight out of it. Whereas if you're kind of growing and living through that situation, you're not going to notice the changes. And so one of the things that Shakespeare might have been concerned about is that the audience has noticed and spent time with Othello and Desdemona during the gradual disintegration of their marriage. And so striking Desdemona to the audience might not seem to be so very shocking because we're kind of expecting it. Whereas Ludovico is like the frog who jumps straight into the boiling pail of water and then tries to get straight out, because he is plunged into this world that he has no experience of, and he suddenly realizes how violent and repellent Othello is being towards his wife. And so Shakespeare brings Ludovico back on stage at this point in order to provide a moral commentary on the action that he sees in front of him. And Ludovico's surprise and his horror at what happens is supposed to guide the audience's reactions. And then there's a little bit more dialogue, and Ludovico says, "Is this the noble Moor, whom our full senate call all in all sufficient? So is this the person who we think is so amazing? This the nature whom passion could not shake?" Now, this is an interesting line. In Act 2, Scene 3, Othello finds that passion essays to lead the way, so his irrational emotions dominate over his rational thought. And that's what Ludovico is noticing here, that whereas they previously thought that Othello was a very rational character, what they're noticing now is that his emotions are actually shaking his very existence. And in Act 5, Othello shakes again. There's a line in Macbeth as well where Macbeth's frame shakes under the power of the emotions and the thoughts that he has. And so we have this descent from rational behaviour into complete irrationality. And Ludovico notices that the virtue, all of the good qualities of Othello seem to have disappeared. So Act 4, Scene 1 is a turning point in the play because all of these things which have kind of been under the surface of society are becoming public and coming to the fore. Just to finish off then, I've got an independent learning task for you about aspects of tragedy. Now, if you're doing the AQA Lit B course, you'll be very familiar with the idea of aspects of tragedy. If you're doing a different course, you might not be so familiar with this, but it's still useful for you because these concepts are going to cross over into other schemes as well, not just the AQA course. So I want you to think about the questions on the side. So how is a tragic hero presented? How is a tragic victim presented? How is a theme of order versus chaos presented? And how is the theme of blindness presented in this section that we've just read? And go back, find a few quotations and jot them down, and then jot down your explanation and your analysis of those quotations. So thanks very much for listening, and in the next video we're going to look at Act 4, Scene 2.